You are listening to the Living Room Confessional podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Living Room Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Courtney. So, I've never actually, or I think I have, but I haven't done it in a long time. I haven't done an episode from my actual living room. And it's Christmas time. It's not Christmas yet, but I'm recording this early and it drops on New Year's Day. So we've got the Christmas tree in the background and it's pretty. So I wanted to sit in front of my tree, but my neighbors are outside and they never come outside. And they have little kids and they're on the trampoline. It's really cute. But I can hear them and I'm hoping that you guys can. I don't think you can. But we're just going to do this raw, real. These things happen and we're just going to roll with it. So this year's episode for starting off 2025 is making decisions in 2025. Every year I like to challenge myself, so I wanted to challenge you guys. This year I have 3 points that I want to make for this topic. This year's topic was moving forward in 2024. And as you guys know, if you've heard like the first couple of episodes before, I was moving forward, but I had a lot of issues that popped up and they caused me to have to take a lot of time off last year. And while it was very hard not to get on here and record, I think I'm in a better space at this point in my life. There's a lot of new things happening and areas that I've grown in that I'm excited to share with you guys. And for starters, I have another podcast that actually launches a week from this one going live, and it's called Refined Conversations. So my faith is taking center point on both of these podcasts, and we're going to be talking about God. On this podcast, we're talking about life experiences, mental health. All of that is still the same, but we will be talking about our faith. On the other podcast, I am doing interviews. It is all about faith and the relationship that we have with Jesus. So I hope you guys love this podcast, and if you like this podcast, you'll love the other one, so please go over there and check it out. I also want to mention that my co-host is sitting next to me on the floor and apparently doesn't like what I have to say because he's making every noise that you could possibly make as a puppy. Yeah. Y'all, please ignore Ranger. Please ignore any noise that you hear outside. I really wanted to do this from my living room because it just felt right, and the Christmas tree just looks so good behind me. So just bear with me. All right, so getting back to the topic, making decisions can be daunting, and from a biblical perspective, there are many guiding principles that we can tap into when it comes to making decisions to make that process easier. I have my notes down here, so I'll be looking down a little bit if you're watching this on YouTube. So the first one is going to be seeking God's guidance, and I've attached this to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which teaches us to trust in the Lord with all of our heart and not rely solely on our understanding. And acknowledging God in all our ways leads him to direct our path. From this point, I recommend that you start a prayer list. Attach a Bible verse or choose a word for the year. So let's dive into why. If I start with a prayer list, it helps you remember the things that you've been praying for. As we go throughout the year, we get really, really busy. And sometimes we forget the things that we pray for. And it looks like God doesn't do anything in our lives. But if you have a prayer list, something that I love to do is to go and check off everything that actually comes to pass that I've prayed for. And it helps me at the end of the year have kind of a little bit of a temp check for my life and where I am and what I want to carry over to the next year. I always say, I think I said it in the previous year's podcast, just because you didn't hit a goal last year doesn't mean you can't add it to your list of goals for the next year. The same thing goes with your prayer life. Just because you prayed something in 2024 or in 2025 and it hasn't happened yet, that doesn't mean that God's not going to do it. We're on his timeline. So then we need to give ourselves some grace and like stop believing that because we said it needs to happen at a certain time, it's going to happen at that time, and trust that if it falls in alignment with his plan for your life, he will get it done when it is time for it to be done and not a moment sooner. So by creating a prayer list, I think it helps build your faith because you're able to look back and see all the things that God's done in your life the past year and so far this year, which should give you momentum in trusting him with the rest of your year. So that's what the prayer list is for. It's to keep track of the things that we ask God for. There's no problem with restating or asking it in a different way or even taking it off the list. But if it's something that's that important to you, write it down, pray about it, and if it helps you, track it. So an example for me would be my house. I've been praying for a house for years. It has been on vision boards, or not a vision board, but like a list of visions. It's been in prayer lists. It's been on the forefront of my mind. But sometimes I start praying for other things because I had a lot going on in my life. And so I wasn't praying for the house as much because other things took precedence. But then when things started taking shape for me to get a house, all of a sudden I was able to go back to the prayer list that I had. And I was like, oh my God, because sometimes I'm very specific in prayers. And on my prayer list, I had written that I believed that God was going to bless me with a white house. My house isn't white, but it has white trim, and inside is pretty much all white. So it just kind of solidified that God really heard my prayers. He just answered them in his own time. And so it's beautiful to be able to go back and see how much he's done in my life that I may not have realized had I not kept track of the things that I had asked him for or had been praying about. Another thing that I recommend is tying a verse to your year. And I have a lot of verses here, so I'm going to be looking down quite a bit. So as an example, Jeremiah 29:11. That is the verse. Like, that is just one of my favorite verses. But that is the verse that I tied to my life in prayer when I moved to Charlotte. Every major decision that we make, that you make, tie it to a Bible verse for reference of the promise. So Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." This verse gave me so much courage when it came to trusting God and the plan that he has for me. I never saw myself having that big of a transition, especially to a city I'd never been to. And so when it came to trusting God, like, I needed this verse because I'm trusting in his plan. And his plans are always better than mine. But it's really, really hard to remember that sometimes, that he knows what he's doing. Even if you don't, he does. And God is always in control of everything. And you can, with reassurance and full confidence, place your life and everything you have, all your ambitions, everything you want in his hands. If it aligns with his plans, it will come to pass in his timing. So that's what this verse means to me, and I absolutely love it. And it's crazy because the other morning, I was getting ready to go leave, and I was running a little bit behind, and y'all are going to probably laugh at me because most people don't do this, but somebody knocked on my door, and me being me, I'm like, who's at my door? Because nobody visits. I'm thinking, people do visit me, but I wasn't expecting anybody. And so I go to my door, and there's two Jehovah's Witnesses at the door, and one's a man, one's a female. I opened the door, and I was like, what's going on? Can I help you? And they're like, they asked if somebody else lived here, and I'm like, no, that person doesn't live here. And I was like, it's cool. Like, I'm actually on my way out, but thank you for stopping by. And they're like, can we leave you with a message of hope? And I was a little, at first I was like, no. But then I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll play ball. Sure. And so he pulls out this pamphlet, and I'm looking at it, and he goes, I'm just going to turn to this page, and there's a verse I want to read to you. And it was Jeremiah 29:11. Well, now I'm locked in. I'm like, that is one of my favorite verses. Like, read it. And I'm like, he's reading it, and I'm reciting it, and I'm like, this is so dope. We had a great conversation. I was a little late for brunch, and I'm never late. But like, that was worth it. It ended up being such an amazing experience. And it just made me realize that sometimes we really need to pause. And sometimes a word from God comes, or a reminder from God comes from the most unlikely of sources. And it was so funny because they were like, can we come back by and talk to you one day? And I was like, absolutely. So yeah, I'm that person that, yeah, I just stood out there and we had a great chat. But it's all because of that verse. And when he said that verse, I knew that I needed to have this conversation. There was something in it that I needed to hear. And every time that verse pops up, there's usually a lesson or a message or something tied to it, which gets my attention. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I'll probably just overshare, and I'm trying not to do that this year. But I will say there's another verse, which I've talked about here on here before, and it's my favorite verse. It's Isaiah 49, 15, 16, and it reads, surely they may forget, I will not forget you. I have carved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. That is my favorite verse, to the point where I tattooed it on myself. And if you remember that episode, they forgot the word forget, so we had to get it covered up. But it's still there. It's just for me, because this is my favorite verse, and this is actually the verse that I am tying to next year. So I've had quite a few moments where I have felt isolated and alone, and I know that God is always with me, but in reality, sometimes you really just don't feel his presence. And when I'm going through something painful, that's immediately what I look for. And this verse reminds me that he is always present. And even when I don't feel it, sometimes you need to ask, God, I feel extremely alone. I feel very isolated right now. And I need to feel your presence. And I guarantee you, it will come through. And so that's what this verse reminds me of. I think it's also a reminder, because God knows who you are. He created you. And when you feel invisible in the world, know that the Father that created you knows every hair on your head. He knows exactly who you are. He knows exactly where you are, because he is with you in that moment. And that makes this verse important to me, because in the moments where I feel so isolated and alone, the God who created me is standing there with me. There is nothing that I can do, nowhere I can go, where he does not have a clock on where's Courtney. Courtney's over here. And he knows who he created. He knows that I can only go so much time before I snap on this person for doing this, or I can only go this far in this area of my life, or I might get uncomfortable, or I'm in new territory or something, or where I might need more support, or when I need a word of encouragement. He created me. He knows me. And I find comfort in that, because he's never gonna leave me. But sometimes when you need that extra, I call it a hug, that extra bit of his presence where you just really feel him and feel his presence within you or just around you, you can ask for it. And I know this might be a stretch depending on where your faith is. You might be like, okay, you sound crazy right now, but I have to impress upon you, God's presence is everywhere. Where you look, where you go, like there's nowhere that he can't go. God is omnipresent. And so when you need him, don't forget that he is your Father. And you have the ability to reach out and to ask him, God, meet me where I am. He will meet you exactly where you are. There's nowhere that you can't go, that you could go, that he can't follow. So I'm going to stop that right there. And then I have two more examples of tying verses to things in your life, especially for the coming year. And the next one's going to be Matthew 6:33. This verse is what I tied to my business. And I'm not going to read the verse. Go and take the time and read these verses. They're good verses that you could actually use for your life, for your business, for a friendship. It does not matter. Anything that you want to do. And then my other podcast, I have a verse that is tied to it, and it's the foundation of that podcast, and that's 1 Peter 1:7. And I talk about this verse on that podcast all the time, and I hope you guys go listen to it. But I talk about this verse on that podcast all the time. It's about the refiner's fire and how we're constantly going through the process, being refined and purified so that God can see his reflection in us. And he has to remove all the impurities to make us more like him, because we are full of sin. So it's going to be an ongoing process. But please listen to Refined Conversations. The conversations on there are fantastic. But I'm going to go to the next point. But this is what I mean when I say tie a verse to everything that you do. Any big decision that you're going to make, tie a verse and invite God into it. If you want it to go well, it doesn't mean that it's going to go poorly if he's not involved. But if you shouldn't be doing it and you haven't invited him into it, you're going to struggle. So invite him into it, tie a verse to it, because those verses are like a promise of what God has written in the Bible that you can follow. It gives you a foundation when you're moving forward and when you're doing something new. And it's a reminder of who he is and that he's not going to leave you. So the next one is going to be wisdom and discernment in making decisions. So James 1:5 encourages us to ask God for wisdom when we lack it. Making decisions with God's wisdom helps us discern the right path, even in complex situations. So making a good decision requires gathering good intel. You need reliable information. Do not make an important decision on a whim or base it on like feelings, because feelings are fleeting. You can't be surprised when things don't work out when you operate that way. It's just irresponsible, if I'm being honest. Thinking back to when I launched my first business, which did not have the best outcome. I did not do any work. I didn't do any research. I kind of stepped in the water blind and was like, oh, I'll just figure it out. I can swim. Like, I can figure it out as I go. No. I had the worst decision making. God was not in any decision I made. I was not in half the decisions I made. I started copying people and trying to replicate things that other people were doing that was working. And so then everything that I was doing was very inauthentic. And I didn't stand out on my own. And that's a problem when you're trying to build a business. You have to find your market. But if I'm trying to steal everybody else's market, it doesn't work because they're obviously doing it better. I've probably been doing it a lot longer. But I realized that the lack of forethought and follow through and research and general unawareness caused me so many problems. And I was lazy. Like, I was extremely lazy as far as it came to doing anything, which all of these things contributed to me making really poor decisions. So ultimately, that is why the business failed to take off. It's because I put very little energy and research and thought into what I was actually doing. And anything that you care about, you want to prepare for it as best you can. Sometimes you can't control every outcome, but you can control your part in most outcomes. How you respond to things, not your initial response, because sometimes like you're surprised and then you're like, okay, but now we need to do this. And you can be very strategic about it. But all of this stems from the kind of decisions that you make and your ability to make those decisions. So when you hesitate to make decisions, you are going to miss opportunities. And learning from failures and mistakes is a better alternative than not making a decision or allowing somebody else to make a decision. So let's pause right there. Not making a decision is a decision. Like, point blank, period. You cannot blame your failure on anybody if you lack the drive and the motivation to even take the first step in making a decision. Starting is a decision. But if you won't even do that, you're never going to go anywhere. The second part, allowing someone else to make decisions for you. When you are doing something and you really feel like you don't have a handle on it, what are you looking at that's driving the decisions that are being made? Who is making those decisions? And why are they making those decisions? I always say, like, people starting businesses, when you partner with somebody, one person cannot make all the decisions in a partnership, or the business is going to look like their vision and not yours. And there's a reason why you're partnering together. It's because you have a vision together. But if you allow them to make all the decisions based on what they want to see, where's your stamp on the company? You didn't make any decisions. So you can't get mad when things don't go your way because you never stepped up. So making a decision, whether it's a good one or not, is a good decision as long as you make it. You have to take the accountability when it comes to making your own decisions and stop looking for other people to tell you what to do. It's a part of growing up. If you're not ready to do that, then don't expect your life to go anywhere. When you're a child, your parents make your decisions. That's normal. They help you make decisions until you're able to start making decisions on your own. I'm talking to adults on here more than likely. Make your own decisions. You cannot rely on other people to do the things that you need to be doing and then sit there and blame them for something you didn't do. We have goals, we have dreams, we have visions, we have all these things that inspire us, all these things that we want to do in our lives. But if you can't get up and make the first step, if you can't make the decision to at least start, or make a decision of where you want to live, or make the decision of what you want to do, you're not going to do anything. And somebody else is going to have to tell you what to do. You should not be 22, 25, 36, 45 with your mommy and daddy or your husband or your wife telling you what to do. You have to learn how to make decisions for yourself. And so something else I also want to point out, when you hesitate to make decisions or you don't make decisions, sometimes you also end up with a default outcome. Your default outcome is going to be watching others do the things that you aspire to do. And what happens with you is you kind of go with, well, it is what it is kind of thing. Like, let's just see what happens. It is what it is. I'm not going to do anything. When things go wrong, that's your fault. The default outcome is not going to get you to the outcome that you wanted. And if it does, it won't last because you still have to continue to make decisions. I think that's one of the hardest parts about making decisions is wondering if you made the right one or not. But I think that part of the excitement in doing anything is the, will it work out? Will it not work out? Do I have the ability to try again? Do I have the ability to learn something? Like, I made a mistake. Okay, how can I grow from this? What solutions can I find from this? It's keeping the excitement that allows you to keep building on the first decision that you made or whatever solution you find. But if you allow default outcomes to pretty much rule your life, that means you're not making wise decisions. And you can't get mad if things don't go your way. And all these 3 little kind of bullet points that I just put in here, not making a decision, allowing other people to make a decision for you, or sitting on the default setting, these are still decisions that you're making. You're just making very poor decisions. So moving back to the scripture, John 1:5, when it comes to asking God for wisdom, when we make decisions, understand that you are human and God is God. You may not always receive a crystal clear, audible answer. And sometimes it's simply remembering that faith is an action word. And once you ask God, you're not supposed to sit still. You have to still move. Ask God to order your steps and direct your path. God makes the crooked path straight. He will make it make sense. You have to trust in him. But the thing about it is you have to move. The Bible says faith without works is dead. Faith is an action word. Take the first step and figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And if you are a Christian, you should be praying step by step by step all throughout your day. Pray about it and get your confidence from knowing that God will direct your path. And it helps you make better decisions because then you're not wondering, is God in this with me? It's like all of a sudden the door will open and you're like, oh yeah, there he is. Like, we can chill. I will say that discernment comes in handy when you are making decisions and you're walking on a path. If you're in new territory or you're dealing with something that's unfamiliar to you, pray for discernment in your decision making, because the discernment is when God closes a door, you'll know the door is closed. When you lack discernment, you might start kicking and trying to push the door open. You might try to break a window or find a way in. And he's just like, no, this is not for you. That's where discernment kicks in. Realizing what God is doing, and when he says, no, this is not for you, being able to go around that and find the next door that is actually open. A lot of times when we are trying to move through life and we have a lot of things that we want to do, we end up being so hyper-focused on what our plan is, what the thing is that we want, that we miss what God is trying to do or what he's trying to tell us. And we really need to stop doing that. We need to pray for discernment and then allow God to instruct us and actually follow said instructions. I have a problem where I've done that in my life where I'm like, God, what do I do? Or I'm going to take the first step and I'm praying about it and I'm just walking and trying to be in faith in everything that I do and be obedient. And then God closes the door, and this happens a lot with relationships. We're not going to talk about those right now. God is closing a door, and I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep calling. I'm going to text you like 8 times when it's just like, okay, he hasn't responded in like 2 weeks. So it's taking things like that. And I know that's like a very broad example and a little embarrassing, but whatever. It takes things like that to show us that we lack discernment and we're not listening. Where we're looking to start a business, or we see somebody that's doing something and we really want to be involved, but that's not for us. And so everybody's always talking about find a seat at the table, get a seat at the table. What if God is what if he's already built you a table? He's just waiting for you to grab a chair. Like, I think that that's something that we overlook as Christians quite a bit. Like, we're always trying to be a part of somebody else's vision. We see what they're doing, we love what they're doing, and somehow we just want to be a part of it. But what if God has called you to a completely different vision, a completely different table, yet you just don't see it because you're so hyper-focused on what you want? Like, let's be real. What you want is not always what God wants for you. And so it's like, who's standing in the role of creator and controller of everything? You or God? Because you can't sit here and ask God, do this, do this, do this. And then when he was like, no, I built you something better over here. And you're like, no, I said this. And so I've gone through this. That's why I'm able to talk about it. I've done this too many times where somebody has something going on and I'm excited about what they're doing. But God's like, that's not what I called you to. Your gifts don't even align with that. You need to come over here to what I have for you because it's better and it's more suited for you. Over here, you're just going to go through problems because I've told them to do something specific and you're distracting them now. And so I think that we really, really need to trust. We really need to trust and focus on God and what he's doing in our lives, what he's calling us to. Sometimes he does call you to help someone else in their vision or whatever they're building. That's not unheard of. It happens all the time. You work for a company, like you're called to work at that company. It happens. But sometimes when God places a vision on you and you think it's too big or it's too scary or you feel like you're not ready for it, you deflect and you focus on something else so that you don't have to deal with the thing that he has called you to that you're afraid of. My faith had to mature before I could really discern the difference between rejection and redirection. Rejection is a no, plain and simple. Redirection can be perceived as rejection until that door opens and then we're like, oh my God, I see what you're doing there, God. Like, okay. I have a lot of those moments where I'm like, now I get it. I see what you're doing. Thank you. And it's hard. It's not hard to get confused by the two because a lot of us lack patience with the vision that God has for us. And we perceive God's closed door as him saying no, rather than saying not yet. We think he's saying you get nothing. And he's saying, I have something better for you. And it could include something from over there, but it's over here. So go that way. And I think this is God protecting his investment. And his investment is you. So when God is redirecting you, don't take it as rejection. See his love in it and his grace in it, that he has something better that is more suited to you. And sometimes it's not even rejection. Sometimes it's just a not yet. You're not ready or they're not ready. But when the time comes, if it's for you, he will open the door. It's respecting him enough that you allow him to guide you. It's respecting and trusting him enough for him to guide you. So when you ask God for wisdom, ask him to couple it with discernment. And remember that ignorance breeds misunderstanding. So when you ask God for wisdom, understand that it is coupled with discernment. Have an idea or a plan, share it with God, ask for wisdom and understanding, align with his plans, move forward and trust God to lead your decisions. And this is the last point I have. faith over fear. 2 Timothy 1:7 reminds us that God has given us a spirit not of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Fear can paralyze decision making, but faith empowers us to move forward confidently. Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. When we make decisions and we place God at the center, we have the faith that he will intercede in the situation. As you build your faith, your confidence will naturally grow. When making decisions, confidence improves your decision-making power, and fear has the opposite effect. Making decisions in fear limits our abilities, our options, and our access. We serve a limitless God. If he is at the center of your decisions, you can have confidence that he will move and has the ability to exceed your expectations. Going back to where I am now, I'm in a new state. I am in a home that I purchased. God has done exceedingly more than I ever imagined he would do. Going back even, 3 years now, when I was let go from the job after he told me to leave. I didn't because I was comfortable. So I decided to stay for a year and do something different, and ended up going through a year of just pure hell. Like, the amount of tears that I shed in that year, it is unbelievable to me. I'm not a crier like that. I don't know how I didn't see it while I was in it, but it's that hindsight. Sometimes you don't see it until you're out of it. But even when that door closed and I kind of got pushed out that door, he already had something lined up for me. I had an offer 3 days later. When I tell you he has a plan, and that's going to be better than anything that you could have ever imagined, I'm not kidding. I've seen it firsthand. I walk through it all the time, where he exceeds my expectations. Stop putting limits on who God is and what he can do. When you do that, you block your blessings and you make the pool smaller for yourself. He has no limits. So throw out your expectations. I say that all the time. When you expect something in your life and you haven't given it to God, okay, expect something smaller. But when you have expectations tied to what God is doing in your life, expect to have your mind blown. Anticipate, or try to anticipate what he's going to do next, because you really can't. He is going to blow your mind and blow your expectations out of the water, because that is who he is. He does not do things the way that we do things. The Bible says, lean not on your own understanding. We will not be able to understand fully or comprehend fully who God is or how he operates until he tells us. I feel like we get bits and pieces. I get bits and pieces. But then he does something that exceeds my expectations. And I'm like, how did you do that? Sometimes I can work out certain things and the background, when I look back and over what happened. But a lot of times I'm like, that came completely out of left field. But he was doing something in somebody else's life that translated to my life and opened a door for me to do something that I never expected to do in my life. That's who God is. And that is why you need to cancel out your expectations of what you think God should be doing in your life. And I want to say fear will lead you into thinking small and operating in ideas that the world deems attainable. God does not work like that. What the world's standard is trash in comparison to the things that God can do. He operates outside of their standards and accomplishes the impossible. Example, I'm reading Dave Ramsey's, I just finished it. So I was reading EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey, and he touches on the importance of having faith in your decision making. And he says, and I'm going to quote it, "At the end of the day, faith is the determining factor between something happening and not happening. What that means is your faith is a compass. It's your guide to move through life, and it is the definitive decision. You believe or you don't believe. When we make decisions in faith, we are trusting that there will be an outcome, regardless of it's the one we want, regardless of if it's the one we want or the one that we don't want. When we move in fear, decisions lack drive and direction, and it's a toss-up if anything will happen at all. Remember, even not making a decision is a decision. You determine how it's initiated. Every decision is your responsibility, and its initiation is your responsibility. Are you going to make that decision with faith or in faith? Are you going to make that decision in fear? This year, be bold in your decision making. That's all I can really ask. No matter the outcome, trust in God that his will be done. It's going to work out for you if you have patience, if you are thoughtful, if you are confident in your decision making, and above all else, be prayerful when you're making decisions. While we cannot predict every outcome, we can find comfort in knowing that we are not alone in our decision making. And that makes it easier. Because when you have to make decisions alone, you're relying on yourself. But when you allow God into your decisions, you got a parachute. Because he will carry you and he will not put you in a place where he will not sustain you. While many of us are waiting for a seat at the table, God may be trying to give you your own table or help you build your own table. He has already created a plan for you. You have to trust him and know that it will be better than what you expect it to be. Focus on him, focus on his plans for your life, and things will work out as he intends them to, which will work out in your favor. So make every decision count this year, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.